Okay, well, while Brandon's looking for that and helping us out, thank you. My name is Freda Heald, and I am hosting this meeting tonight. So welcome everybody to our Feds education meeting. First of all, we're going to, I think there's a couple candidates that are on our call. So I'd like to go ahead and let them introduce themselves. Jessica Mason, are you on?
Yes, I am.
Awesome. Okay.
Quick question. How long do we have to introduce ourselves?
I would say like a minute and a half.
Okay. Well, hello, friends. Thank you all for inviting me tonight. My name is Jessica Mason. I am a Navy veteran, affordable housing coordinator, and anti-poverty activist. But most importantly, I am a daughter of South Dallas. My story begins as a little girl. I was raised in poverty. I was raised by a single mother who worked for a millionaire businessman and was paid, starvation wages. As a child, I had very severe asthma, and my mother could not afford to pay for my asthma medication, which was like $20 at the time. My lung collapsed at the age of 7, and I spent 3 months in the ICU. That's why my campaign is really focused on progressive policies like Medicare for all. I'm also focused on the Green New Deal. I mean, in Dallas, our infrastructure is crumbling. Winter Storm Uri, which has left a lot of us in the cold and dark for days, is really evidence that Texas needs to focus on vast investments in clean, green infrastructure. To be honest with you, my campaign is just about fixing a system that has failed marginalized and working class people across this nation. We have politicians in office that are beholden to their corporate donors and stock portfolios. And I am not taking any corporate PAC money to make sure that I am always accountable to the people. The incumbent, as you all know, she is a political boss. She's been in office for 28 years. And it's really impossible to work in Dallas politics without her support. She does claim to be retiring. However, she said this for years. But either way, having her or a cherry-picked establishment Democrat represent this district would really do nothing to help our community. And that's why it's time for us to elect a strong progressive outsider. I can really sit here and speak to y'all for hours on the injustices and the abuse of the working class in this country. In my work with the Dallas Stops Evictions, I have seen people being evicted from their homes at unprecedented rates. We need affordable housing. We need unions in every workplace. We need bold activist leadership. And it's time that we start calling out systemic inequities and crony capitalism for what it is. And we need to be proactive in legislating policies designed to correct these past failings. I feel like we are all at a cusp of change, and I hope that you all will join me in this fight. Together, we will change the course of this district and ultimately this nation. Together, we can repair the wounds caused by political design. Together, we can defeat lobbyists and corporations and guarantee a fair shot to all Americans, regardless of their race, their sexuality, their gender, their income, or their immigration status. No one would have ever thought that, a Black girl like me from South Dallas would ever be able to run for Congress in this district. So I'm asking y'all to join me in reimagining what is possible. Thank you all for having me. Once again, my name is Jessica Mason, and I'm running for Congress in Texas 30.
Thank you, Jessica. Does anybody else here that's a candidate that wants to introduce themselves? Okay, so I'm going to introduce Joan. We are very excited to have her join us tonight. Joan writes and speaks on voting issues, especially the impact of gerrymandering, money in politics, redistricting, and how other states have designed their independent redistricting commission. She leads discussion groups about various options and how Texas could design an independent redistricting commission. Joan actively campaigned during the primaries and general election 2008, 16, and 18 as a deputy registrar and worked the polls during early voting on election day in November 2018. She's an active member of the League of Women Voters, having served on the program and voters guide committees. She is also an active member of Independent Texas Redistricting, Common Cause, American Promise, and WOW Dems. She was previously a business consultant to smaller and lower mid-market business for 15 years and a certified financial planner. Joan was the founder and president of North Texas chapter of the Exit Planning Institute and was a recipient of the Institute's Volunteer of the Year Award. She was program chair of North Texas chapter and hosted and produced a monthly 1-hour webinar for over 4 years for the Institute, which is an international audience. We welcome Joan Ridley to our Feds meeting tonight.
Thank you. It's so much fun to be with a group that thinks like me and I think like you. That's code for I'm a Democrat too. And so this is a lot of fun. This is not a partisan issue. And I want to make that very clear. But I think the path to changing how we draw our voter district lines is partisan. We've got to get Democrats into office all the way down ballot. I do believe that. Okay, so let's get started. You all can see my screen, I think. You see a red United States with a little that's a salamander. Can you see that? Yes? Everybody's probably muted. Okay. You see it? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Gerrymandering is an incumbent protection program. That is what it is. And we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about how it impacts you. And if it makes you mad as hell like it does me, what can you do about it? We start with it is a redistricting process, and it starts with US Census. The census reveals shifts in population, and then with that information, the legislators redraw the voter district lines every 10 years, of course, and this results in new voting districts, which we're going through right now. We will not have, because of the pandemic, we will not have the census report until September 30th. I don't think we're going to have it much sooner than that. Therefore, the redistricting in Texas for congressional and state, and then all the way down to all the other districts, I do believe we're not going to have it till sometime in October. And that's when you're going to see a barrage of lawsuits. I want to make it very clear, we're not talking today about racial gerrymandering. That clearly is unlawful and has been since the Voting Rights Act of 1965, thanks to Democrat President Lyndon Johnson. We're going to talk about partisan gerrymandering, which, believe it or not, is totally legal. And so I hear the terms gerrymandering and redistricting used interchangeably. They are not. Gerrymandering is an extreme form of redistricting. And what happens is it's a process of redrawing the voter district lines by the majority party legislators. Now we're talking about Texas here. In Texas, whoever is in the state house, in the House and the Senate, they draw the voting district lines. Right now, it is the Republicans. For nearly a century, it was the Democrats. It's done in closed secret meetings without voters' input or knowledge to favor their party so that their party remains in office for at least the next 10 years. Now, I don't know if any of y'all heard this, but Phil King, who was the chair of the redistricting committee in the House until this current 87th session started, he was interviewed along with Joan Huffman, who happens to be the senator who chairs the Senate redistricting committee. They were interviewed together by the Texas Tribune's executive editor, Ross Ramsey. And he asked both of them, how does politics enter into the drawing of voter district lines? And I thought it was interesting that Joan Huffman, Senator Huffman, was pretty diplomatic in her answer. She said, once we're in office, we represent all people in Texas. So we draw the fairest lines as possible. Now, did she really believe that? I don't know. But then he got to Phil King, and he said, our party, the Republicans, voted us into office. So of course we're going to draw maps to favor our party. He was so very, very blatant about it. The upshot is self-serving politicians use partisan gerrymandering to further manipulate our already broken system. And big money, and we mentioned that earlier, gets them into office. Partisan gerrymandering ensures their job security. Once they're in, they keep drawing those lines to make sure they keep their jobs. And what you might not know is that In the 2020 federal elections, $15 billion, actually more, was spent on those elections, which is pretty extraordinary, more than any. And that includes some of the money that was spent on the Georgia elections, the recounts. I'm sorry, it was the runoffs, not the recounts. Okay, so what impact, let's see, what is the impact on how we are governed? Well, it's pretty extraordinary because with partisan gerrymandering, especially in Texas, we are the seventh most very gerrymandered state in the country, by the way, one being the worst. I have a feeling we're going to move up to number one very quickly. But legislators have job security. They're unresponsive to our needs. People don't register or turn out to vote. It's very, very hard to get them to turn out to vote. We are 47th in the country in terms of voter turnout, 50 being the worst. Legislators first focus more on staying in power than on serving us. They argue so loudly between themselves, they don't even hear us, and no potential opposing candidate wants to run for office. Now that did improve, I'll say with the 2018 elections, because we had record number of candidates, Democratic candidates registering to run for office. We had over 300 just in Dallas County alone. That was a major accomplishment, because for so many years, you go to vote and our side of the ballot was empty. There was nothing there because nobody wanted to run against the Republicans. And then again, it attracts candidates with questionable intent. Need I give you any examples? So when we're talking about gerrymandering, I ask you, if you think it's not relevant to you, I ask you, what's your issue? One of mine is gun control. It's one of the most important for me. Gun control, healthcare, drug costs, women's reproductive rights, public education, funding, climate change, opioids. You go down the list, and what you're going to find is when the legislators are not introducing bills and passing bills that reflect how we feel about all these issues, it's all about big money and partisan gerrymandering, and it's destroying our democracy. So it's nothing new. And if anybody here knows me, you know I'm a storyteller. I love to tell stories and I love history. You might think it all started with Elbridge Gerry, but it didn't. It really started with Patrick Henry back in our very first election to the US House of Representatives in 1789. So this is nothing new. What happened then was Patrick Henry, he was not even a member of the Virginia legislature at that point, but he still had a lot of friends there. So he said, you know, we don't want this Madison guy to win the House, this House seat, because he's very much for a strong central government. But we in Virginia don't want that. So let's draw these voting district lines so our pal, James Monroe, wins this election, because he thinks more like we do. We want state sovereignty. That's what they called states' rights back then. They wanted the states to have more power than the federal government. So they thought, wow, that's a great idea. So they drew the lines as best they could. It did not work. James Madison walked away with 1,308 votes, and James Monroe got 972. But that was the beginning of gerrymandering in 1789. So I often thought, why don't we call it Henrymandering? It wasn't until 1812 when Elbridge Gerry, who had served in many offices, signer of the Declaration of Independence. He also, he eventually signed the Constitution, although he fought it, but he eventually signed it. He became governor of Massachusetts. And it was at that time that the legislator drew the lines in a very gerrymandered fashion. Remember that salamander I showed you on the very first slide? That's what the district looked like. And so they drew that line, and it was the Boston Gazette. Some cartoonist picked up on it and embellished it, and he called it gerrymandering. And that's how it all got started back in 1812. Over the years, the G became softened, and it's now called gerrymandering. And it really didn't start with Elbridge Gerry. He really does get a bad rap, but I still like to make jokes about it because one of his direct descendants lives here in the Dallas area. which I found out quite by accident. I was speaking to a group up in Plano about 3 years ago, and I was making jokes about Elbridge Gerry. I mean, I read a lot about him and history, so my jokes were legitimate, but when this guy raised his hand and said, I am one of those descendants, I went, oh my God, I hope I got my facts right. You know, I kind of started laughing. I mean, I get from an audience, I can't help myself. I start laughing. And he and I, his name is David Stringfellow. He lives up in Plano, but we became friends. And he said, everything you said about my ancestor was absolutely true. And I had shown them, the audience, a book that I read that was very hard to find. I finally found it. It was the only bio I know of Elbridge Gerry. And he said, our family collects those books. Can I buy it from you? Well, no, he couldn't, but he found it on the internet for about $1,600. I said, now you really can't have it. I paid $65 for it. But anyway, that's how it all got started. It is un-American because it sets up an unfair fight. And election results do not reflect the will of the people. I am a member of League of Women Voters, and like a lot of the feds, I go out and register people to vote. And I remember being at Brookhaven College about 3 years ago, and we're trying to get the students to register to vote. And we weren't having any takers. And we asked why. And this one black guy in the back said, because my vote doesn't matter. I cannot even think about that without tearing up. It upsets me so much because you know what? He was right. And I told the county commissioners that when I testified for a resolution not long after that. It's just tragic that it does disenfranchise many voters. So why should every American care about this issue? It's a nonpartisan issue that affects every American, and it is one of the major reasons why our democracy is in jeopardy. Why is it such an issue today? Well, mostly because technology. Every time you and I get on Facebook, every time we go shopping on the internet, every time you do anything on the internet, that information is collected and it's bundled and sold to the marketing consultants, and then it gets to the consultants, to our legislators, and that's how they know everything about us, and they know how to draw the lines. So watch what you say on social media. And now we also have map drawing software. So we know what the population is, it gets dumped into the software, and now with all this demographic information, they can draw some very, very precise lines. The well-known ones are L2 voter mapping, Nation Builder, Maptitude, and Red Apple, which is what the Texas House uses. So it's become very, very precise. I'm sure you've heard this before. Those states that gerrymander, and all the other districts too, not just the states, they use these specific strategies. It's not helter-skelter. They are doing cracking, packing, kidnapping, and hijacking. And cracking is where if you have a lot of people who would vote the same way, let's say Democrats, okay, let's pick on the Democrats, in a certain geographic area, and let's say we are in charge of the legislature, let's be optimistic, we want to take as many seats as possible in the election. So what do? We spread out, we crack that district wide open, that population, so those Democrats end up in the neighboring districts that we're drawing. So we have a chance of taking the three seats maybe in the House instead of one that would have happened if we kept them all in one place. Now, the goal is to win every district by maybe 51%, maybe 52%. Whereas if you didn't do that cracking, you'd have maybe 80% of the vote in that one district, and you'd have much less than 50% in the surrounding ones. So you're maximizing the amount of districts you are going to win. Now, packing is just the opposite. That's where you have voters of like kind, the Democrats, and you want to pull them all together to take one seat and still be able to take the others too, then you pack it. Hijacking has to do with the incumbents, and actually hijacking and kidnapping, when they're redistricting, that's what they address first. What are they going to do with the incumbents? If you're going to hijack, if you want to take two candidates from the opposing party for an election and they're in two different districts, you want to draw those lines so suddenly their houses are in the same district. Only one can win. So you're eliminating one candidate right there. Cannot win. In the kidnapping, is just the opposite. That's where you move the district lines so that the other party's homes are no longer in the districts that elected them. And so they have to start all over again with courting constituents. They have to start all over again with fundraising. So if you have a very popular legislator, a Colin Allred, a Nathan Johnson, look out, because they are at risk. Okay, so what should voting districts look like? Well, there are some rules, not many, but there are some. The Texas House and Senate and Congress congressional districts must have equal or nearly equal populations. Now, it's pretty basic. The Texas House must also follow county boundaries whenever possible. They're not supposed to break up the counties. Add to that, the Texas House and Senate district lines must be contiguous. A circle would be the perfect example of a compact district, which would really be the epitome of complying with the rules. Now, in addition to that, they all have to comply with the Voting Rights Act of 1965, but we no longer have pre-clearance. We used to have, Texas one of the bad boys. We always had to take our new district maps right after census and get them approved by the Attorney General's office, basically. But the Roberts Court did away with that a few years ago with Shelby versus Holder. We don't have to do that. Woo-hoo, no rules. So look out, Democrats and Republicans are going to have a heyday. Okay, so I'm going to ask you what you think. Do you think this is a perfectly compact district? Does that look like a circle to you? Look at that. That is one district. It's the U.S. House of Representatives, District 35 in Texas, which goes from Austin down to San Antonio. That is one of the most extreme examples of gerrymandering. And I will say, if you look at Austin, how the lines are drawn, there are about 4 or 6 different districts in Austin alone. And on the campus, University of Texas in Austin, there's a district line that goes right through the campus, dividing the campus into 2 different districts. So that like population is being split up. I like to use this example of the result in terms of elections. This goes back to 2016, but it's a great example where the Republicans took 50.4% of the popular vote. The Democrats took 49.5%, but look at the percentage of seats the Republicans took, 55%, even though they barely had 1% more in terms of popular vote. And the Democrats got 44%. We became powerless. We became powerless. We can't get anything done. We can't please our constituents. We know what we told them. The legislators know what they told them they'd accomplish once they got to the House, but look, you can't. With 44% of the vote, you can't accomplish much of anything. That's why we need to end partisan gerrymandering. People are not being represented properly. So why isn't the Supreme Court doing anything about this? Most of the country, I think 76% of the country, wanted the Supreme Court to come up with rules and guidelines so that they could once and for all, the Supreme Court say, you are partisan gerrymandering, this is unlawful, draw the maps again. Unfortunately, we finally got the Supreme Court to hear a case. Actually, it was 2 combined. It was the Maryland case, which is gerrymanders heavily for the Democrats, and North Carolina, which gerrymanders heavily for the Republicans. They heard the 2 cases together. They actually heard a case for the first time, and then they went, nah, I don't think so. I don't think we're going to do anything with this. And the reason is that they don't know how to measure it. That is what the legal opinion seems to say. They don't know how to measure it, so they don't want anything to do with it. I don't think it has a whole lot to do with it being a states' right versus a federal issue. I don't think it has anything to do with it at all. I mean, clearly it's contrary to certain articles of the US Constitution. So the Supreme Court will not get involved. It said the states now must solve their own problems, which is why we're seeing such an, I think, an upsurge in all the bills. We're going to look at them in a minute about having a redistricting commission in Texas. We're behind because all the other states are starting to do it. If you want to visit that, see that, that Supreme Court case, you can go to LeagueOfWomenVotersDallas.org and you can actually read it. And somebody on my committee there actually summarized it, this dissent, beautifully written. I mean, and it was delivered with tears by by Justice Kagan, Lena Kagan. I mean, she was just distraught by this decision, and you can read her dissent on the League of Women Voters website. And then you can read the summary of it if you don't want to read the whole thing. So let's talk a minute about who actually draws the maps in Texas. I admit I was pretty curious, and so I did some digging. And what I found was, here's what happens. The legislators, once they get the census in Texas, they will draw the maps for Texas. I'm distracted by the dog, he's so cute. They will draw the maps for Texas. They will also national maps, who we're going to send to the US Congress, of course, and the Senate and the House in Texas. They draw during the regular session, but if the maps don't get drawn and passed, signed into law by the governor, something called the LRB, the Legislative Redistricting Board, will draw the maps for Texas, the Texas districts for our own representatives and senators within the state of Texas, except in the 87th Congress, which is where we are now. The rule says, the law says that they take the census and they draw the maps. Well, what if they have no census to work with? I am told by a gentleman who actually draws the lines in the Senate that because they didn't have the census to draw the lines from, the Legislative Redistricting Board will not be drawing the lines this time for Texas. That board is made up of the Lieutenant Governor, the Attorney General, the Speaker of the House, the Comptroller, and the Land Commissioner. Those 5 people make up the Legislative Redistricting Board, and they have drawn the maps for the last 5 decennial maps. But this time, he's telling me no, because they didn't have the census during the regular session. Boom, it's going to go to a special session to draw the district lines for the state of Texas, as well as for the congressional maps. Now, the congressional map drawing would always be drawn by the legislators in a special session. But the funny part is the LRB is not going to draw it for the state of Texas, which means that the other legislators are going to have a crack at drawing the maps for the state of Texas. Very interesting. Now, usually it's the paid consultants and the staffers who do the heavy lifting. Do you really think that Senator so-and-so sits there and actually plays with software and draws maps? Maybe not. Usually it's paid consultants that draw those maps using the technology that we talked about and all the demographic info, and they do it with the staffers. Then they take it to the legislators, say, what do you think of this? So I'm told that that's going to be actually a little different. So let's talk about how the sausage is really made. I talked to an attorney in the Office of the Redistricting Committee. His name was Sean, I can't remember his last name. And he works with another attorney named Anna, can't remember her name either, but the 2 of them, he told me, will be drawing the voter district lines for Texas. Very interesting. And then they present it to the whole, all of the legislators in the Senate, and they have to approve it. That's very interesting. So you got 2 people now drawing the lines. In the House, it's very different. What they do, and I talked to someone on the redistricting committee there, what they do is they give the legislators RedMap. Remember that software I mentioned? They get armed with RedMap and they get all the data from the census. They get all the demographic data and they draw their own lines. And then they take it to the redistricting committee in the House and say, this is what we want. In the Senate, once Anna and Sean have drawn the lines, they show it to the senators and say, what do you think? Do you like this? Or would you rather have this line moved over here to this other street so you capture more voters, or you push out some incumbent or whatever? I mean, it's a very manipulative process. I don't hear a whole lot about them wondering what we want. And that's the problem. Well, once the House and the Senate, they each draw their own maps for the whole state, and then they come together real friendly like, haha, and they negotiate it. And then once they come to an agreement, my guess is that the Republicans will determine the final outcome. Then they take it to Governor Abbott. He signs it, or he vetoes the bill, or he doesn't sign it at all. He signs, vetoes, or doesn't sign it during the session. So that's how it's actually done. And I would imagine most of the public doesn't know all this. I mean, as many years as I've been reading about this, I didn't know this nitty-gritty part of it. But I have some really good news. In the 87th session in Texas, in Austin, we are seeing a huge amount of bills. I would say probably in the last session, I think we had about 6 bills in the House. We had 1 in the Senate to change how we redistrict. The one in the Senate was coming from Royce West. From what I read, it was a carbon copy of what they have in Arizona. It's their redistricting commission is half Republicans, half Democrats, and they have this poor little independent that has to keep the peace. But this time, 33 bills have been introduced in the House. They have been referred to committee, and they're actually going to have some hearings, which I find very exciting, because for many, many sessions, when Cindy Burkett was chair of the House Redistricting Committee, they had no meetings at all. And she would tell us the governor wouldn't let her. So at least we're getting meetings. I understand we're going to have hearings open to the public. That's very exciting. On the Senate side, we have 9 bills that have been introduced. They have been referred to committee. One of them was introduced by, at least one was introduced by Senator Huffman. And it says that let's change the voting dates, because you can imagine if you don't get the census till September 30th, and then in October, if you're lucky, you get the maps that have been signed by the governor. How would you like to be a candidate trying to decide if you're going to run or not knowing what your district lines are going to be? You don't know who your constituents are going to be that you're going to pursue during campaigning. You don't know what funding you're going to get from constituents, because you don't know who they are yet. So anyway, I will say several of the bills in the House especially, and some in the Senate, are what we call placekeepers. And that's where you have to introduce
this shit.
What's that? You have to introduce the bills by, I believe, March 12th. So they had to have what they called placekeepers, so that when they want to introduce a bill, they just go reword it. But the bill was introduced, they just reword it. So it's a little misleading. There are several bills that include establishing a redistricting commission. One even calls it Independent Citizens Redistricting Commission. Sadly, that one is only talking about the congressional lines, not the state House and Senate lines. But it's still pretty exciting. Gonzalez is in the House, Menendez is in the Senate, Howard is in the House, Efraini is in the Senate. So you got several people wanting to talk about redistricting commission in Texas, establishing one. Is it going to go anywhere in this session? I doubt it, but my God, we've come a long way. Only a few years ago, they weren't even having meetings. They weren't even looking at the bills that were being introduced. So I think this is very exciting. So if you're curious about how to stay on top of the bills, I signed up for alerts, and I urge you to do that too. And these are the links to the alerts for the House and the Senate. You go in there and you click on what bills you're interested in following. And what they'll do then is you'll get in your inbox the latest that's going on with a particular bill you're following, or any number of bills you're following. It's a very efficient way to see where a bill you're following is going. Now, are these good websites? easily navigable? No, I don't think so. I've heard people who are pretty good at technology, even they say it's not easy to navigate. But if you get in on this alert business, it's going to make life a whole lot easier in terms of figuring out what's going on. Now, I was curious because I know that Dallas County is a confluence of so many different voting districts. And so I looked into it. I ran out of room on my slide. There might be more. There are 41 House districts, Texas House districts in Dallas County alone. 5 Senate House by Senate districts, 6 U.S. House districts, 2 Senate. I mean, it's wild. And then there's 4 county commissioners plus a judge. That's a district, and it gets redistricted. And then you got the school boards, the city councils, the water districts, the judges. It's a big deal going on with the judges right now because they're talking about moving around the judges' voting district lines, and that's going to change the oversight of the jurisdictions for the judges. It's a big deal. Don't know that that's happened before. Also, you might be interested in knowing who in Dallas County sits on the House Redistricting Committee and the Senate Redistricting Committee. And these are people you want to stay in touch with. In the Senate, we've got Kelly Hancock, Nathan Johnson, Angela Paxton, and Royce West. Well, Royce West, as you well know, he's been around for, oh my God, how long? He knows everything about everything in the Senate. And he's very hip to this idea of redistricting, changing how we redistrict. He would like to have an independent commission. It's a good one for you to stay in touch with. Nathan Johnson is another one. He's very active in this genre. Stay in touch with him. Now in the House, Rafael Chia has been our champion to create. He's more about transparency. He'd be happy. He's not going so much for creating an independent district redistricting commission. He just wants them to tell us what they're doing and why, and give us a chance to have some input while the lines are being drawn. So these are people you want to stay in touch with. So you need to let your legislators know what you think. There are some bills that are being followed very closely by those of us who are very interested in setting up a redistricting commission, especially one that's independent. And there is a website you can go to. It makes it, I'm not trying to push Lakeland voters, but they make it so easy for us. You just go to this link, you click on it, and you got to scroll down pretty far. But then you just put in, I think you just put in maybe your zip code. I don't even think you have to give them your whole address. And then you just click a button. I want my legislator to know what I think about this. You don't even have to write a letter if you don't want to. Boom, they get it. And I know they get it because I'm getting responses from the legislators saying, thank you for your letter. Okay, it's canned, but hey, I know they're hearing from me. If they get enough of these things, they start paying attention. So I've been asked about redistricting in Dallas, and it's pretty interesting. I read the city charter a few years ago, and I was absolutely delighted. I was absolutely delighted to find out that we have an independent redistricting commission right here in Dallas for our city council. Isn't that nice? But when I got done reading it, I realized this isn't an independent commission at all. Because what happens is, first of all, the city councilmen get to nominate who they want to have on this commission. Okay, maybe that's fair enough. And then the city council, and then the mayor decides who's going to be on that independent commission. And I happen to know one person who actually was nominated and selected to be on it. I think she's a fine choice. So the commissioners, the independent commissioners, they get together and they draw what they think is pretty fair lines, including with a real nod to what we call the communities of interest, keeping the communities together that have the same needs and would want to have their needs represented. And then they do that, and then it goes back to city council. What do you think happens? the city council gets out their knife and their fork and they start cutting everything up and moving it around and horse trading. You take this part of the city, I'll take this part. And before you know it, you've got a very gerrymandered city. I happen to be in 14, very gerrymandered district. If you look at it, it looks like some strange animal. It's very bizarre. And excuse me, we've been out campaigning a lot. You know, my husband's running for city council, and you've got everything from the not so wealthy to the very wealthy, the city dwellers, and people are more like in the country. It's really wild. Now, how can they possibly have the same needs? And how can anyone possibly represent all their needs properly? So that's what we do here in Dallas. So even though we have an independent redistricting committee, that's probably in name only. So what's the solution? Well, I always look to California because that's where a lot of the trends start, and that's where this one started. California has the gold standard. They established an independent citizens redistricting commission in 2008. They started working on it in 1984. They were at it for a long time. And Common Cause was the nonprofit, nonpartisan group that worked very, very hard over all those years to get their state legislator to pass a bill to establish such a commission. Surprisingly, it was a Republican governor. When he saw what was going on, how the lines were drawn, he was furious. And he started working very, very closely with Common Cause and finally got the California legislator to pass their independent citizens redistricting commission. That was Arnold Schwarzenegger. And he is still out there. He hasn't been governor for several years. He's still out there working with the various nonprofits that push for this, promoting the idea of establishing an independent citizens redistricting commission. I will say that it's had a very positive impact on their voter turnout. And here you can see the result for their primaries. Now they started out with 25% voter turnout for their primaries compared to our measly 4%. In 2018, we zoomed up to 10% voter turnout. We were, thanks a lot to the feds, by the way. So that's what they did. They started out with 25% primary voter turnout in 2012, and it zoomed up to 37% in 2016. That's extraordinary. That is extraordinary. So we could have that too. We just have to think that way. So it's going to be an uphill battle if we want to do that, because in order to pass an independent citizens redistricting commission in Texas, unlike many other states, we have to get a bill through the House and the Senate, the same bill. Then it has to go through, pass the House by 66%, the Senate by 66%. Then it has to go on the ballot to the people who have to vote more than 50% to pass it. In most states, I think it's probably all the states now that have passed such a bill into law, they just had, their legislator just had, it was in their constitution. If you want to change something, you just have to, get X number of signatures on a petition. And if you get that many, then it gets on the ballot. And if the voters vote for it, fine. It doesn't go through their House and their Senate. But that's not the case with us. So we've got a long, long road ahead of us. How can you end partisan gerrymandering? First of all, I always, when I go to meet and greets or talk to, senators or members of the Texas House, I want to know before I vote for them or I vote for them again, I want to know they are on board with this initiative. I want to hear it. And it's gotten to the point that in the last go around, in the last elections, when they'd see me at a meet and greet, they'd look at me and they say, now we all know why Joan is here and the question she's going to ask me, and here's my answer. And that's what you want. You want to keep the pedal to the metal and let them know you're not going to give up. Write letters to the editor. I like writing letters to the editor. Until the campaign started, I was writing like one a month and getting one a month published. But that kind of had to go by the wayside in the last 2 months. call, email, meet with your legislators. They will listen. And if, you know, go to their websites and make comments, go to League of Women Voters, and there are other nonprofits out there that make it very easy for you to stay in touch with your legislators. You keep pushing, 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 they are going to listen. Request and support bills that promote the Independent Citizens Redistricting Commission or some sort of redistricting commission that appeals to you, what bills you like. Let them know, write them a letter and let them know what you think of particular bills. Testify before the House. There are going to be public hearings about these bills, and you will know when you get those alerts that I told you about, you will know when those hearings are coming up, and you need to submit a written testimony or a verbal testimony. Now I will tell you, be careful which button you're pushing, because I did it for the Senate. I really wasn't up for testifying in person. I thought, no, I'm not going to do this. I'll just submit a written testimony. And I must have hit a wrong button because somehow I got on their calendar. So I did show up and testify. And what I did was basically read what I had written. My testimony was very different from other people's. I think they may have heard enough about keeping communities of interest together, keeping the Black community together, the Asian community, the different socioeconomic levels, because they all have the same needs and you want them to be represented. I didn't go that route. No, I'm a little too unconventional for that. I came up with other reasons why they should support these bills. And it was more like, with the demographics changing so rapidly, you're a fool to try to think you can draw voter district lines that are going to work for you the next 10 years. And I told them, we're on to you. We know you're just trying to stay in power. We know you don't care about us. And all right, maybe I trashed them a little bit, but hopefully they listened. And then if you can't listen to the public hearings in person, they record them. You can go to those websites I gave you and actually listen to the recordings of the testimonies and do whatever you can to educate the public. My little bit is talking to people. Once this epidemic is over, hopefully I'll be back talking to Lions clubs, Rotary clubs, throw me to the Lions. Let me speak to the Republicans, because you know what? They're going to lose if we don't do something. We all lose. They're doing, you see what they're doing in Austin? Ridiculous things. They're desperate to hold on to power. Desperate. Look what they're doing with the gun thing, for God's sake. Look what they're doing with Planned Parenthood. My gosh, they are desperate. So you want to get out there and really support this. Now, I'm going to give you some resources. I've mentioned League of Women Voters. Make use of their resources. My God, they've done a lot of work. I wrote the page, a lot of the page on gerrymandering there. There is one website I really, really like, and I found it after a long time of researching this stuff. It's Justin Levitt's website, and I'm giving it to you here. I think it's the most different, insightful website I've seen. It's not the same old stuff. And he is a professor at Loyola, Loyola University, I think, in Los Angeles. He is a well-known constitutional lawyer. If you look at the legal opinions for some of the lawsuits that were brought on the gerrymandering map drawing, you will often find that he has written his articles of his opinions. And he wrote one for Rucho versus Common Cause, the big Maryland, North Carolina case that went to the Supreme Court. Read that stuff because you'll get a feel for how they think. Of course, Common Cause, they have a good website. So does the Brennan Center for Justice. These are all, they're nonpartisan. They are not Democrat, Republican, although you almost have to be a Democrat to go along with this stuff. But they're very scholarly. They're not bashing anybody. They're very scholarly. And they are very credible sources. So if you ever want to quote something in a testimony or something, these guys know what they're talking about. Michael Lee with Brennan Center for Justice, he's a director. He's probably the most credible, he's the most expert person on partisan gerrymandering in the whole country. He's with Brennan Center for Justice. He's from Dallas, but he's up in New York because that's where the Brennan Center is now. It's up in New York University. But don't be shy about quoting what you see there. You could take it to the bank. There's a book that I discovered, came out in 2020 called Gerrymandering in Texas. It's the only one I know of that was written about this issue just in Texas. Actually, he's written several books, Steve Bickerstaff. It's the real nitpicky parts of how we got to where we are. And when you read that, you realize, hey, sorry, the Republicans aren't the only bad guys. We did our fair share for almost 100 years. And the end of it really was when the Republicans started to wrestle power from the Democrats. And what the Democrats do, they got on a plane and went to Oklahoma or somewhere. They just didn't want any part of it. Well, because they'd been in charge for so long, they didn't want to give up their power. I'm going to give you another book I absolutely love. And it has honestly very little to do with gerrymandering, but I think it's worth a read. And it's called Democracy in Chains by the well-known journalist Nancy McLean. I couldn't put it down, although it gave me an upset stomach because I could see she goes through chapter and verse of how we got to where we are now. I highly recommend it. It's an amazing book. So that's about all I had to share with you. I hope I didn't talk too long.
Will you take questions?
Yeah, but I can't guarantee I'll know the answers, but I'll try.
Yeah, so I think what we're going to do is I'm going to start with the one question that's in the chat, and then we'll go to a couple of questions for a little bit, maybe like the next 5 to 10 minutes. Is that okay with you, Joan?
Yeah, can I stop sharing here without knocking? Okay, yeah. There we go.
Okay, so first of all, thank you so much. So informative. And I think we all learned a lot. I have a question in the chat that says, there are a few bills in the Texas legislature to create a nonpartisan, independent redistricting commission. How likely is that those bills will pass both chambers and become law?
Chances, slim and none. Not in this session. And I think you might be referring to the one submitted by Mary Gonzalez. It's the only one I know of. And it has to do with congressional maps and not state. But I still love that she's done it, and I hope she'll do it again. You got to keep at it.
Where is the information coming that we're possibly getting 3 new representatives for the Congress in Texas? I mean, we haven't finished the census completely. So where's this coming from? Who makes the decision, final decision, that our state gets 3 more representatives? And if we did not have an increase in representatives, why do we have to redistrict on the national for the national political offices?
Okay, say that last part again.
If we had no, why do we have to change the districts at all on a national basis? That is for our House of Representatives.
I see.
If we had no additional or no losses of representatives.
Okay. Okay. First of all, where's it coming from? Actually, it comes from the demographers who study the migration and growth of population throughout the United States. They are the ones who were saying it looks like we're going to get Texas is going to get 3 more members in the House, and they even know where they're going to come from. What states have lost population? And they're usually northern states. People are coming to the South. So that's where it's coming from, the independent demographers. And then you had another question in the middle of those 3.
Why change the districts if we have no increase or decrease in congressional representatives?
Well, the thing is, the number of representatives we have is based on the population we have. And because our population has grown so much, and by the way, it's grown mostly by birth, not by an influx of immigrants, by the way. But we do have an increased population in Texas, and that's why we are entitled to more representation than the states who have lost population. So that's why we're going to get 3. I have even seen 4 seats from some demographers, but they're pretty much in the minority. And then you asked another question.
Why redistrict if you don't have an increase or decrease in representatives?
Well, we did. Our population has increased, and the census will reveal that. We have to wait to see what they say, but the demographers are telling us Texas has had a huge increase in population, therefore, and other states have had a loss. Therefore, we are entitled to have 3 more votes in the Texas House than the ones that have lost population. And that's how that happens. So that's why we're going to get more seats. Therefore, there are going to be more seats. We're going to go from 435 to maybe 438, maybe 439, but I'm not all that optimistic about that. That's how that happens. Any other questions?
Well, let's ask about the state itself. Why do you redistrict within the state? And why not just keep the districts the way they are?
You know, we used to. If you read that book that I mentioned, Steve Bickerstaff's book, that's what we used to do. But because the populations are shifting within the state, they are going to draw the lines to reflect that. That's why. Some cities in Dallas, some places are growing. Look at Plano, for instance. Look at North Texas, it's growing. That's going to make a difference in how they draw their lines. Who else?
What other information do you have about the voters? I mean, we don't have actual information on who voted for what. You know, for example, I voted this Monday. There's no information about my vote as for the various issues, I don't believe, individually. Therefore, how do you know who voted for what within a given area of the track?
Oh, I say, so they can draw the lines? That has to do with, they can figure out where you go to church. If you worked, where you go to work. They can figure out the minutia of your lifestyle. That's how they figure out how you're going to vote. It's absolutely amazing. That's how they do it. And I would love to know more about that myself. How do they get from one thing to another? I don't know. But that's where they get that information. That's why I say, be careful what you say on the internet. If you go on Facebook, because they call that information. Not the legislators, they buy it from the people who do. It's scary. We have people coming to my husband's meet and greets who live across the street from the people who are in my district, and they're contributing money because they want him to win. That's how much those lines, they break up communities to think alike, and that's the rub. Those people are not being properly represented. So what else?
I have a question, Joan. Do you think, so for this session, they're going to have a, come back and have another session, and you think that there will be a lot of redistricting this October, November?
Yep, that's when it's going to happen. It's going to happen we may have, I'm told, maybe more than one special session, but we will have a special session to draw the district lines, to haggle over it, and to get the governor to sign it. But that won't happen until at least October, maybe November. And there's a group called Fair Maps. If you want to go on their website, it's fairmaps.com, fairmapstexas.com, I believe. It's a coalition of all the nonprofits that are fighting to get an independent redistricting commission. And they have been fighting for a long time that, hey, it's nice that you're having hearings now, but why don't we do it after the census is available to us, and then we can have a meaningful discussion about how you should carve up these districts. We may actually win that battle because they are starting to listen to us. But that would be ideal, to wait till we get the census and then start having conversations with the citizens about what do we think about the lines they're proposing to draw. Maybe it's a pipe dream, but you got to start somewhere.
Do you think they care what we think?
Only if they think they're going to lose an election. They might care. I think that's the biggest argument we have. If they keep doing what they're doing, they are going to lose elections. And they've got to be getting pretty scared, because you can see the state is turning blue. And if it does, they don't have a snowball's chance of winning this argument. So keep doing what we're doing with the lit sticks and everything. My golly, let's keep doing it. It's groups like ours, like the feds, that are going to change things. So.
How's McConaughey?
I am an optimist. Okay, I am an optimist.
Me too. I agree with you, Joan.
I'm a long-term optimist and a short-term pessimist.
Fair enough.
Well, it took Georgia 10 years to become blue. So the long term is a good way. A long-term optimist. Here we go.
We need a Stacey Abrams, and is what we need. She will never get voted to a higher office because they need her desperately doing what she's doing. Bless her heart.
Betta's working hard on that.
So anyway, but I want you to leave with feeling upbeat, that I am an optimist and I feel that this is going to happen. And because the voting is changing, we are turning blue, that helps. And the people who are in power are starting to see this isn't going too well for us. You know, either we've got to listen or we're going to lose our seats in the House and the Senate, and they are. So I think a combination of things leads me to feel very optimistic.
On the other hand, being my short-term pessimist, that very same reason that our population is turning blue is why they are so desperately trying to keep us from voting.
Yes, I agree. Yes, I don't think anybody would disagree with that. I mean, it's criminal what they're doing. And here's the funny thing. I mentioned big money in politics. I don't think you can separate these two very well, these two topics. But I thought it was interesting. Now, it's mostly coming from Mitch McConnell when he says, you know, he was happy to take, GOP is happy to take the corporate dollars and to vote to keep the corporations happy on their issues when it's working for them. But when the corporations decide, you know, we don't want to be business in a state or a country that's not a democracy. That's why we're here. It's a democracy. And you're taking it away by taking away those voting rights. Suddenly he doesn't think it's a good idea that the corporations should be involved. I thought that was kind of comical. He wants his cake and eat it too, but they all do.
Again, being a long-term optimist, having watched politics as long as I have, the one thing I am most struck by is how the internet has changed where politicians get their money.
Yes.
Because all of a sudden, large corporations and the ultra wealthy are not the only game in town for getting money from, yes. Not the only sources of money. You and I and our $25 contributions, you know, can outweigh them.
That's right, because $1 is a vote.
Yeah.
$1 is a vote. $1,000 right. Is maybe one vote, you know, so it does, you know, it's interesting. And I agree with you. By the way, if you want to know where the money comes from, there's a good website called opensecrets.org. And these people, another nonprofit, they do their homework. And if you want to know where the money's comes from for a particular legislator, they've got it. You just go in there and start entering the names of people and all, and boy, it comes up. And if you want, okay, it's a PAC that supported that person, where's the PAC get its money? Boom, 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 there it is. It's a great way to see. And then you can follow the money and see how they're voting on issues, you know? And they can, because they're gerrymandering, and how they vote doesn't matter. It only matters to the corporation that funded them. They don't care how we vote because gerrymandering will keep them in office. So their two are very intertwined.
Yeah. So. Well, as both a League of Women Voters member and a Feds member, I want to thank you very much for this excellent presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're very kind.
No, we're just we're an honest group.
So I have one. There's one more. Joan, thank you for that open secret also, and all the different websites. We have one more question in the chat. It says, is there a good blog or something where a bill is translated so the average person can understand and take action?
Boy, that's a great question. Let me think. I'll tell you what I do. I haven't found it. I just call their offices and ask their staffers, what does this mean? I did that actually about 2 weeks ago. I was looking at some bills and I thought, and they all had the same kind of language and it didn't make any sense to me. So I called, God, what's that guy's name? He's the attorney who's drawing the lines in the Senate on the redistricting committee. And I said, would you please explain to me what this means? This is a bunch of gobbledygook. He said, you're right. It's a placekeeper. I wish I'd called him sooner. But if you call their offices on the redistricting committees in the House and the Senate in Texas, their staffers will answer your questions, especially if you're a constituent. Now, I call Rafael Anchia. He's not my representative. He's over in Oak Cliff, but I call his office because he really knows what's going on in the House Redistricting Committee because he's been there for so long. And I will call him and say, what does this bill mean, even if it's not his? And for the Senate, I do the same thing. So I found that very helpful just to call their offices. It saves you a lot of time from getting on the internet and trying to find stuff. So, but that's a great question. That's a really good question.
Question about the current election. I'm in the Richardson Independent School District, and they have 2 propositions up for bond money. And evidently, in the state of Texas, they've passed a law that says, in compliance with the new state law, all bond propositions in Texas must include the following statement on the ballot. This is a property tax increase. It's in bold letters. And yet the Richardson Independent School District has stated that they can fund these particular bonds without raising everyone's taxes. So it seems like it's a misleading thing that the state of Texas is requiring that this be put on there, and yet the district itself is saying, ignore it, we can fund it out of current taxes.
We have some in Dallas too, like that. Doesn't have to do with the school board. We have 2 propositions, and I'm not going to vote till I really know what they're saying, because you think you know, but then you wonder what's behind this, because I see the answer they're driving me how to vote. I want to know why. And that's a perfect example of that. It's like, if you do this, they know you don't want your taxes raised. So that's why they put that in there. And your point is they're raising the money from this bond money. It's not your taxes.
Well, it's misleading.
It is misleading. And a lot of those propositions are probably written by lawyers.
I want to thank Joan so much for coming to our Feds meeting. It was so informative, and I think that everybody really enjoyed it. So we try to kind of stay somewhat on time for that, and we appreciate that. Joan, if people have other questions, could they like email you or?
Oh, I'd love it. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So will you put your email in the chat?
Oh, sure. Let's see. The little mousey doesn't want to work. This is, I cannot get my cursor to go. Here it goes. Okay, there we go. Okay. Joan. Let's see. And if you want to call me, that would be great too, but not now. I'm on roller skates right now. Okay, there we go.
Okay,
Absolutely.
perfect.
Absolutely.
Okay. And I just want to say, and there's also some other great different websites that everybody had put in the chat also while Joan was answering questions. So you might want to look at that. And this also has been recorded. And we can, we'll put that on our website. So I thank everybody so much for coming. Our next Feds meeting will be our May meeting. And that is coming up on Tuesday, May 4th. And we hope to see you then. So thank you so much. Again, my name is Freda Heald, and I look forward to seeing you at all Feds events. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Joan.
We'll see you. Bye-bye.
Great job. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Freda. You did a great job.
Oh, thank you so much.
Okay, so I went up to press recording, and I think somebody else already had. So
oh, you know what? Mary might have already recorded it. Like when she sent me the link, it might have already like just automatically recorded.
Okay.
So
somewhere or another, it's recorded.
Okay.
We can find it, I'm sure.
Okay.
And I saved the chat too.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Freda. See ya.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.